Hi, I'm Janet Deneef, founder and director of the Ubud Writers and Readers Festival. You are about to hear one of our highlight conversations recorded live for our 2022 festival, which explored the role of the written word in upholding humanity's values and freedoms through our festival theme, Memayu Hayuning Bawana, Uniting Humanity. So please settle in and let the magic of our 19th festival continue.
Good morning, everybody, or maybe I should say good evening. Thank you for your patience. A few teething problems this morning with accommodation and transport, but we're all finally here with you this morning. So I'm Jill Westaway, your moderator this morning. I'm a freelance translator, editor, living in Lombok, running my own guest house there, and a long-term supporter of the Ubud Writers Festival. On my right, we have Audrey Magee, who will introduce herself a bit more detail later, Juli Sastrawan, and Saut Poltak Tambunan, and Pak Chris is going to help us with translation of Pak Saut's inputs. So today we're sitting here to talk about rekindling dormant languages. And I wanted to start off by thinking a little bit about why it's such a big deal. Why at 10:30 on the first day of the Ubud Writers Festival are we sitting here thinking about this? Is it really such an important issue? And I think the answer is yes. It's a huge issue in today's world. And according to UN research, it's estimated that more than 2,000 languages have already become extinct, and that more than half of the languages spoken today have fewer than 10,000 speakers, and a quarter have fewer than 1,000 speakers, and that unless there are some serious efforts to maintain them over the next 100 years, most of them will become extinct. So yes, it is a big deal. And I think these figures are often cited as reasons why language revitalization is necessary to preserve linguistic diversity. And I think that Pak Saut will be talking a little bit about the cultural heritage which is tied up with language. Culture and identity are cited as reasons for language revitalization, where language is perceived as a unique cultural treasure. And a community often sees language as a unique part of their culture, connecting them with their ancestors or with the land, making up an essential part of their history and indeed their self-image. And as you probably know, Indonesia itself faces the reality that many local languages are endangered. It actually has the second largest multilingual population in the world, with more than 700 local languages. Only Papua New Guinea has more, with 841. But this total is dwindling very fast indeed in a period of rapid social change. So I thought it was appropriate to start off by talking to our two Indonesian speakers today. And I'm going to ask Pak Juli to start by telling us a little bit about the work that he's doing in the context of being a Balinese writer and his efforts to keep the Balinese language alive. Thank you, Juli.
Thank you, Gil. First of all, my name is Juli Sastrawan, and about the work, 2 years ago, I make a novel called Kulit Kera Piduka, or in English, it's Piduka Monkey Skins. It's like the old Balinese manuscript. I took it and I show it in the novel, and then I use mix also it with Indonesian, so the Balinese manuscript get like exposed from the national context. And this year in February, we collaborate, also make a festival. So there is like a youth movement called Suara Saking Bali, or in English it's a voice from Bali. So we make like a festival like celebrate Balinese. So we read short stories and novel, and we try to make a critic little prize for celebrate it. I think that's the way that the young generation can do, and then together we can like try to rekindling it. Yeah, I think so far.
Interesting. I gather that in your latest novel, you've actually incorporated pieces of Balinese language into the text, which is fundamentally Bahasa Indonesia. Is that right?
Yeah.
Tell us about how you do that.
So first, I do research about what the interesting. So it's about the recipe. So like a sexual recipe from the Balinese old manuscript. So I think it's found interesting, especially about the monkey skin. So in the old manuscript, there is like if you take the the monkey skin, it can be like a perfume to attract people about you. So I think that's the idea I got from the old manuscript. So I take it and then I make a story about it. So I show the old manuscript and then also make the stories. So it's exposed, so people also know about the old manuscript, and then also people can enjoy it not only Balinese but also in the Indonesian context also, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll return to you in a bit and ask you about how you see things moving forward to preserve the Balinese language. But for the moment, saya mau bicara sebentar dengan Pak Saut, dan mungkin Pak Saut bisa menjelaskan bagaimana mulai dengan pekerjaan itu dan pekerjaan apa yang sedang dibikin dengan bahasa Batak. Maybe you can translate that.
So I'm going to ask Pak Saut about what his endeavor have been with the local language of yours, which is Bahasa Batak.
Oke, baik. Halo, tes. Mohon maaf, saya harus berbahasa Indonesia. Pertama, saya sudah kurang paham bahasa Inggris, dan kedua, untuk membantu kawan-kawan saya, mungkin hadirin yang tidak begitu paham juga dalam bahasa Inggris.
I have to speak in Indonesian and not in English to to help my fellow friends who are in the audience who are not that good in English. So I will keep talking in Indonesian.
Yang pertama, saya harus ucapkan terima kasih kepada Ubud Writers, karena ini yang ketiga kalinya saya diundang untuk jadi pembicara di sini.
I'm very grateful for the Ubud Writers and Readers Festival. This is the third time I have been invited to be a panelist.
Yang kedua, terima kasih karena memberi tempat untuk bahasa daerah di Festival Sastra Internasional.
And secondly, I'm grateful that the festival is providing a space for local languages, local dialects to be exposed, to be celebrated at this festival.
Tahun 2012 saya diundang ke sini sebagai pembicara dan sekaligus kurator, tetapi saya berbicara mengenai proses kreatif bagaimana sastra Indonesia.
In 2012, I was invited here as a panelist and a curator, but more about how to develop or how to cultivate the Indonesian literature.
Ketika itu buku saya sudah ada kira-kira novel, sudah ada kira-kira 60 judul.
At that time, back in 2012, I already had about 60 novel titles in publication.
Dan waktu itu saya berbicara mengenai bagaimana saya tidak pernah terkena dengan yang disebut dengan writer's block, karena saya menulis dengan perencanaan.
Okay. And I was famous among the writing circles that I never got what's called the writer's block because I always have planning when I write.
Oke. Pada waktu itu saya justru setelah melihat bahwa kawan-kawan dari penulis dari luar negeri juga ingin membaca kearifan lokal daerah Indonesia, tetapi bukunya sangat kurang.
Yeah, I have seen there is a great interest among foreigners, among other people from many countries. They want to read stories with the local content, with the local language, but there are very few books in circulation.
Tahun 2011, Kementerian Pendidikan Nasional membuat pengumuman sinyalemen bahwa ketika itu dari 750 bahasa daerah, pada akhir abad ini dia hanya akan bersisa 10%.
Ya, itu
2011 mereka buat pengumuman.
And in 2011, the Ministry of Education and Culture made an announcement that among the more than 750 local languages that are in Indonesia, by the end of the century, there'll be just fewer than 10% of them left.
Okay. Saat ini Indonesia adalah negara kedua terbanyak bahasa daerahnya setelah Papua New Guinea.
As mentioned before, Indonesia has the second highest number of extant languages in the country, in the world after Papua New Guinea.
Saya penulis berasal dari kawasan Danau Toba, Batak.
I am a writer coming from the Danau Toba or Lake Toba area, where the main language there is Batak.
Saya merasa ikut tertantang, jangan sampai bahasa daerah saya tidak ikut di dalam 75 sisa tahun 2090 nanti.
So as a writer of the local language, I felt really challenged to prove that my language, my Batak language, will be part of the 75 extant languages that will be at the end of the century.
Tradisi lisan tidak bisa mempertahankan sebuah bahasa.
The oral tradition alone cannot preserve a language.
Harus tertulis.
It has to be written.
Sementara ketika itu tidak ada sastrawan yang tidak banyak sastrawan yang menulis dalam bahasa daerah, terutama bahasa Batak, tidak ada sastra modernnya.
But meanwhile, there have been almost no writers that write in their Batak language.
Di festival tahun 2012, saya bersama-sama dengan salah satu penulis terpopuler Indonesia, Andrea Hirata, dan dia mengajak saya untuk mulai berkarya ke luar negeri.
Maksudnya mempublikasikan.
Mengajak saya ikut manajemennya dia.
Untuk mempublikasikan.
Menerjemahkan ke bahasa asing.
Yeah. So in the festival in 2012, I met with a famous author from Indonesia, Andrea Hirata, and he invited me to be part of his team to publish his works, to publish my works in foreign languages.
Ya. Lalu saya jawab, kalau saya sukses di keluar, tetapi saya kehilangan daerah asal saya, itu saya harus bertanggung jawab kepada anak cucu saya nanti.
So I responded to him, if I gain success worldwide or in the foreign countries, but I lose my audience back home, then I feel great responsibility towards my future generations.
Karena itu saya putuskan mulai tahun 2012 saya akan beralih menulis ke dalam bahasa daerah. Karena itu ketika saya diundang kembali di sini bukan lagi mengenai sastra nasional, tetapi justru mengenai bagaimana bahasa daerah harus dihidupkan, harus dipertahankan hidupnya.
Yeah. So that time in 2012, I actually made a commitment to myself to start writing in my own Batak language instead of focusing or instead of talking about the Indonesian literary landscape. I want to focus on my own area, the Batak language, and I would want to continue doing so.
Ya. Menurut UNESCO ada 6.000 bahasa daerah mother language ya di dunia. Setengahnya itu sudah hilang.
Yeah.
Tinggal sisa ini pun sudah dalam tren menurun.
Yeah. So according to UNESCO, there are about 6,000 extant mother languages on Earth right now, and about half of it are in the process of disappearing, and there are only a few left that are actively used.
Oke. Nah, sekarang pertanyaan kita. apa gunanya bahasa daerah dipertahankan?
And the question is, what is the point of keeping the local languages?
Karena bahasa daerah itu melekat di dalamnya adalah kearifan lokal, local wisdom.
Partly because in these local languages is embedded the local wisdom of each area.
Bahasa daerah membentuk karakter khas sebuah suku bangsa.
The local languages, the mother tongues, help shape the characteristics of an area or of the people in the area.
Kita melihat contoh di Indonesia. Ada banyak sekali kebudayaan daerah di Indonesia. Apa jadinya kebudayaan Indonesia tanpa bahasa daerah?
So as you can see in Indonesia, for example, we have so many local traditional cultures alive right now. What would happen to them if they all lost their local languages?
Nah, itu sebabnya saya menghimbau kepada kita semua, dari negara manapun Anda, cobalah kita hidupkan kembali bahasa daerah, karena itu membentuk itu menunjukkan ciri khas sebuah suku bangsa, karakter khas sebuah suku bangsa.
Yeah. So that's why I'm making a plea to you all, wherever you come from, whichever country you are, please rekindle your own local languages, your mother tongues, because it helps us shape the character of each of the area where you coming from.
Jadi sejak saya memutuskan tahun 2012, jadi saya sangat berterima kasih kepada Ubud Writers, karena di tahun 2012, Ubud Writers 2012, itulah saya memutuskan akan beralih ke bahasa daerah.
Yeah, in that way, I'm deeply grateful for the Ubud Writers Festival, because in 2012, when I was at the festival, I made that commitment to fully change direction towards developing or rekindling my local language.
Jadi kalau teman-teman saya, para penulis, ingin menjadikan festival Ubud Writers menjadi jembatan, batu loncatan untuk ke dunia internasional, saya justru menggunakan Ubud Writers itu untuk pulang ke kampung saya dulu, baru mengangkat bahasa daerah ke dunia internasional.
Yeah, right. So, some of my other friends in the literary world use the opportunity to go international from the festival. I took a different course. I instead choose to come home and bring my own language and lift it up for international audience.
Saya kira. Dan sampai sekarang saya sudah menulis 20 buku dalam bahasa daerah dalam tempo 10 tahun.
Okay. And in the last 10 years, I have written about 20 titles in the local Batak language.
Saya terbitkan sendiri 2 buku dalam 1 tahun.
I self-published about 2 books in a year.
Yang pertama, setiap hari bahasa ibu internasional, 21 Februari.
The first book is always gets published on the International Mother Language Day, which is on the 21st of February.
Yang kedua, setiap ulang tahun saya bulan Agustus.
And the second book gets published on my birthday in August.
Jadi 10 tahun saya menghasilkan 20 buku.
And in 10 years, that's how I produce 20 books.
Tetapi saya tidak menulis hanya dalam bahasa daerah. Ini buku Back to Ubud, ini adalah buku dari peserta Ubud Writers Indonesia tahun 2012. Saya kumpulkan dan kita terbitkan 2 bahasa. Bilingual.
But I don't just write in my own Batak language. I also write in Indonesian, and as compiled in this book, Back to Ubud, this is an anthology of writers' works from the emerging writers, and not the emerging. This is the Indonesian writers whose works are collected in this book, published by the festival in 2013.
Di dalam bahasa Inggris.
And this one is also my work, translated to English, an anthology of short stories.
Ya, itu begitu kira-kira. Jadi sekali lagi terima kasih Ubud Writers karena memberi tempat untuk bahasa daerah kita bicarakan di forum internasional.
And again, I would like to thank you, the Ubud Writers Festival, for giving me the space, the forum to talk about mother languages.
Thank you very much, Pak Saut. I think that's a really good look at some of the really exciting work you've been doing to preserve local languages and in particular Bahasa Batak. So thank you for sharing that with us. We'll come back to you again and ask you about the future. But now I'd like to turn to Audrey, who's joined us all the way from Ireland. And I've just read your wonderful book, The Colony, which, if you don't know, has been was shortlisted for the longlisted for the Booker Prize. And I've seen how the dying out of the Irish language is a central theme. Indeed, the very setting of the book on a tiny remote island of the west coast of Ireland is deeply significant linguistically. Can you tell us a little bit about your book and the context of the Irish language within your book?
So, first of all, is that working? Yeah. First of all, what a pleasure to be here. And thank you for all these wonderful insights into language. I must say, I feel like I have come to you from the future, actually, when it comes to language and linguistic discussion. I am absolutely mesmerized by what's happening here on the stage, because in my novel, which is called The Colony, there are two, it's set on an island, and it's 1979 Ireland. And basically, it's a discussion about colonization, about what it is to be colonized, but also what it is to be the colonizer. And obviously I'm looking at power, and I look at violence, because at that time there was a huge amount of violence going on in Northern Ireland that was seeping into the south. This is a southern island. Sorry, I might speak a bit quickly sometimes, because I'll contextualize as I go along. So basically it's set on an Irish island off the west coast of Ireland. And in Ireland, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is divided. The northern part of the country is part of the UK. It's Northern Ireland, it belongs to the UK. And then the southern part has, for 100 years this year, been an independent state. And this island, that my imagined island, is part of this independent state. But there's a lot of violence happening in the north, and that seeps into the discussion about colonization, into discussion, as I said, about what is the impact of colonization on our behaviors with each other, in terms of how we respond to each other, in terms of the hierarchy of violence. But also, one of the things I really look at is what has the impact been on language. And as I'm sure you're aware, in Ireland there still is, but it was an Irish-speaking island, and Irish is a member of the Celtic language group. Now, many of those Celtic language groups would include Welsh, Scottish, but also Manx, which is extinct. So there's this group of Celtic languages up in the kind of the northwest of Europe, and it is struggling for survival. But what's very fascinating for me to be here with you all today is that in the novel I have a linguist, a bit like our friend here, Jean-Pierre Masson, who is a Frenchman who comes to the island. So an English painter decides he wants to go to this island, and he takes a curragh, which is a traditional Irish boat. And he decides he's going to move himself from London. He's going to go retreat to a tiny island. Many kind of might come to Bali in the same way. They want something different. They want to move away from this kind of Western big city culture, and they come somewhere remote because they want to produce a great piece of work or live differently. So he moves to this tiny island in 1979. And he is followed by Jean-Pierre Masson, who is a French linguist. And Jean-Pierre Masson is studying the demise of the Irish language. And it's a longitudinal study that he's doing over 5 years, but his absolutely go-to person on the island is the equivalent. It's a woman called Banny Flynn, and she does not speak English. She probably understands English, but she refuses to use English. She will only use Irish. She doesn't write, but she speaks, and she speaks only in Irish. And I feel so honored to be in this presence, because we haven't had anybody as stubborn and determined like that in Ireland since about 1979. So I set the time for two reasons. I set it on this island in 1979 for two reasons. Number one, linguistically, because this was the last time we would have had a pure monoglot Irish speaker, was 1979. And then also it was 1979, which is where the violence comes in, because it was the summer of August 1979 when the IRA blew up the boat that Mountbatten was in. Lord Mountbatten, a cousin of the Queen, and he was out in the southern part of Ireland, not in the north. He was out checking on his lobster pots in Sligo. And he was a 79-year-old man, I think. No, maybe in his 80s, 79. Anyway, he was out with his his daughter's mother-in-law, who was 82, his daughter, their children, and a young Irish lad. And Lord Mountbatten and two of the boys were killed, and also the older lady, his daughter's mother-in-law. And they were all killed. And it was a monumental moment because obviously it happened in the south. But it was, is this what the violence and the protection, the identification of Irish comes down to, is distilled into that when people are out picking lobsters on a boat, that they're a fair target for the IRA. So it's kind of looking at the two things, the impact of the violence, but then also the impact of colonization on the language. And this is where the two come together, and they blend into each other, because in the end, or at the beginning, if you go back to the very beginning, the what's happened to the language comes out of violence. You know, what happens to a native language, an original language, and I suppose it's swallowing up, its annihilation, or its disappearance by another language. Now, sometimes it happens very naturally, just because, you know, like is happening here, there are more English speakers coming, so therefore everybody starts to learn English. Sometimes it happens more violently, as happened in the Irish situation when the Irish came to Britain. Like, there's always, obviously we're islands side by side, so there's always a kind of a crossover, an influx and influence of language and all that kind of thing. But things changed in the 16, 17, 1800s when there was, if you like, a constructive decision to impose English and to bring in a structure, a linguistic structure of that you had to have English to use law, you had to have English to buy a house, you had to have English if you wanted any kind of transactional system. So therefore, naturally, people moved away from Irish. Now, you could say, well, that's life, that's the way it goes, you know, what does it matter? Which is obviously vital to this discussion here. Does it matter? Does it matter if language changes? It's a living organism. It's you know, you can imbue it with identity, or you can imbue it with a functionality. So what is it? And to some degree, we're actually having to have the same discussion about language that we're having to have about our relationship with the earth. And to some degree, they come from the same premise of a kind of, if you like, the earth is here to serve us, which would be quite a kind of a consumerist Christian perspective, that it is here to serve us, so we will use it as we will. And language is there to serve you. But actually, we know now that the earth is a much deeper and more, we have a much deeper and more profound, and we should have a much deeper and more profound relationship with the earth. But we should also have a much deeper and more profound relationship with our languages, because they embody that relationship with the earth. And they embody that sense of where we come from. They embody that sense of place, that they embody that sense of heritage and history that maybe doesn't matter, but maybe it does. And that is what I explore in the novel. Maybe it doesn't matter, but actually, maybe it's utterly fundamental to our being, that we understand where we're coming from, because it's only where you understand where you're coming from that you can understand where you're going. And that's what I explore in the novel, is does it matter? So I too use Irish language in the book, which is kind of unusual. There's more and more Irish language coming into our arts in Ireland now, which is a very exciting space, but more of that anon in the future. But But what I chose to do was to deliberately, I do completely write in an international space. I'm fundamentally a European writer. All my background would be French, German literature, but I am Irish. So I thought it's time to bring all this together and to bring the language, bring the Irish language into what will be an international book. So I've taken a slightly different perspective. But to do that, I found a community in the northwest of Ireland, because it's set on an island, and the Irish, probably like here too, they're very particular. It's like, is that that island? I know that's that island. I'm like, no, it's not any island. It's all of us. It's all island. It's a metaphorical space. But to protect that metaphorical space, I had to make sure I didn't use an island Irish. So I found a community up in Northwest Mayo, and I used their Irish. But again, there were only 160 people speaking the dialect that I use in the book. And if you can just think of that, most of those people are older. So when I say I come from the future, I come from this space where now this language that I have preserved, and I feel very proud of this, that I have preserved this language that's spoken only by 160 people, because I totally agree, if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. Once that person dies, it's gone. It ends up being an ephemeral space if we don't pin it down onto the page. So I'm pinning it down, you've pinned it down, you're pinning it down. And it's, we are fighting for something, and I say this as not an Irish speaker, it's a kind of an interesting space. I did Irish through school, and then I went off and I speak French, I speak German, but I don't speak Irish. I could speak Dutch, I could speak Romanian, I could speak Italian, but I don't speak Irish. And this, as I got older, began to feed into me in a very deep way. It's like, why don't I speak Irish? Why am I not speaking Irish? And when you look, you then start to analyze, firstly, obviously, the British relationship with the language, in that it was in a language to be annihilated, it was a language to be, it was traduced as the language of the poor and the stupid. So, and it's an amazing, when you put that out there, it's very good marketing, but when you put that out there, that's the atmosphere, then you don't want to raise your children in that language, because it's the language of the poor and the illiterate, So therefore the parents shy away from that. The parents don't want to invest in a language that's already kind of broadcast out there as, oh, you're illiterate and you're poor and you're really of no great value if you speak that language. And that's the past. I know it's the past, but that's what we have to look at. And obviously our relationship with Britain and England and everything is in a different space. But I look back at this moment, because that's when you realize that that's the pitch that our ancestors were sold, then you go, all right, I accept that that's what you were sold. But before it disappears completely, what do we do? What do we do to fight back against that kind of... It wasn't subliminal initially, but it became a subliminal message about the Irish language. And it will become a subliminal message about the languages here, that English is the best language. And it's fantastic. We're all here in this space because we can communicate through English. And that's a wonderful thing. But what do you lose and what should you protect? While still having this glorious ability to be here together with this common language.
Thank you, Audrey. That's great. I think in the course of writing this book, you actually did a lot of research into the sort of linguistic side of it, and you used the character of your French linguist, J.P. Masson, to put these views on the linguistic position of Irish and English across to the reader. In the course of your research, did you get the feeling that there are people like J.P. who are making real efforts to preserve the Irish language?
So it was an interesting space in Ireland in the 1920s, 30s, when a lot of there's a British Oxford linguist, a man called Robin Flower, And he understood the importance of the language. And he went to the islands in particular, the Blasket Islands, and collected the language. And it was interesting because the Irish collectors, the native Irish collectors, were terribly interested in music and folklore, but not so very interested in language. I think probably wrongly assuming that it would always be there. And, you know, so we've a ton of folklore and we've a ton of music collected. But ironically, a lot of our language collection was done by non-Irish speakers who were just like JP Masson, who his mother was Algerian, but he grew up in France, and his whole thing was his mother wanted him to speak Arabic, but he didn't want to identify as an Arabic speaker because he wanted to be French. So he grew up with this and then ended up kind of trying to absolve himself in some way by studying the Irish language and trying to save it. So to some way, a kind of a backhanded, I'm very sorry, mother, compliment to his mother. So sometimes it takes an outsider to show you what is precious, but unfortunately the hard work has to come from within. And we are doing, it's Ireland, if I talk again about the future, but I know you want to do that in a different space.
No, please,
okay.
Carry on.
So Ireland is in a very interesting space in that there have been some hardcore warriors who persisted and went with it. But what's an interesting space as to why I don't speak Irish, and I think this is a very important space for people of my generation, because we all learned it at school and it was compulsory, and it still is compulsory. My kids learn it. But there's a really negative relationship with the language. And why is that? So on the one hand, there's a really negative relationship. It's just deemed to be, oh my God, what's the point? It's hard. And it really is hard, actually. It is this official genetot, which is the genitive. And it's just like so complicated. But anyway, so it puts people off. But that's not really the issue. The issue is that we still haven't quite worked out our relationship with the language. Mohammed Ben Rabab, who would be a French-Algerian linguist, came up with this great line where he talks about language as a proxy for conflict. And that's unfortunately what happened in Ireland, that the language, the Irish language, just became so embroiled with the politics of identity and the politics of nationalism, but more so republicanism, that it just became a complicated space for people. So a lot of people just said, it's too hard, I don't want anything to do with it. So a lot of people just left. They left the country in the 1980s. My generation left the country, there were no jobs. But they also left behind the language, the legacy, because it was a difficult space, because often it became so kind of embodied in the violence that if you spoke Irish, a lot of people would assume that you were then a supporter of the violence. How do you begin to explain that? You know, how do you begin to find the grey of that when you're 18, 19, 20, and you just, no, thank you. So what's really, really, really exciting at the moment in Ireland now is it's 24 years almost since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. And the Good Friday Agreement, as many of you will know, was the peace deal that was drawn up. It's a European agreement with American support, but it was drawn up between England and Ireland and the Catholic and Protestant community in Northern Ireland to find a future way for Northern Ireland to exist in a borderless area, in a frictionless area. And we were doing that very happily until Brexit, but that's another story. But within that context, within that frictionless space, there was a renewed interest and developing passion for the Irish language, because you remove the politics and you remove a legacy of violence and you end up in a completely different space. And it's been just fascinating to watch it and really exciting to watch it. So you have a lot of younger people now becoming involved in the language. And one of the really astonishing things that's happening is that on the east coast of Ireland, so that would be the side with Dublin, Belfast, all the way down to Cork, there was no Irish spoken there at all. And it was only in the west coast of Ireland, in the poorer, what are called the Gaeltacht, or Irish-speaking areas. And that is now changing completely, whereas now numerically, there are more people speaking Irish on the east coast of Ireland than there are on the west coast, which is unbelievable, but those are all what are linguistically called second language learners. They have not learnt it from their parents or their grandparents. They have learnt it through an education system, through teachers, often themselves, many of whom are second language learners. So it's wonderful, and that is creating an atmosphere where there's Irish being used in film, in song, in rap, by people who have come from outside of Ireland, who are maybe of Nigerian extraction, and they're now singing and using things like unshaw, which was what you say to your teacher when you're here in school. You say unshaw. So that's now turning into rap, but it's turning up in film. So it's become quite a trendy, dynamic space. But what's very interesting is it's a very different language to the West Coast language, which is what you're talking about. And the West Coast language is the one that's linked to heritage, to the sense of place, to the sense of belonging. So we now have this gap where we have a lot of people speaking it on the East Coast, but they are no way attached to the original language on the West Coast. So what do you do here? How do you support that? Ireland was last year made an official language of the European Union, which is a very exciting space. So it means all documents now written in English or French or whatever have to be translated into Irish. So that creates a written language, a written text. And as I said, we have all these films and songs and everything being made in Irish. But the gap we have to fill is the monoglot society. We have a monoglot Irish language community in the West, and the rest of the country is monoglot English. Will we ever become bilingual, or is that too late? Will it ever does it have the chance to reverse the tide and become a bilingual society? Because we were never bilingual, and that was the chance missed. You guys here are bilingual or multilingual. That is the thing to protect, and that is the thing to fight tooth and nail for, is the bilingual, trilingual. That's, if I have anything as a voice from the future, it's protect that space, and you'll be fine. But if you lose that, you're losing so much.
Thank you, Audrey. Very, very, very clear. Can I ask Julie about how you feel about the future? What kind of endeavours do you see as being important to protect the Balinese language?
For me, I think if we talk about Balinese language, so it's also depends with the guests or the comers, because there are two things that can happen. First, it's a culture mix, so people use their own language, come to Bali, and then it mix. And then there is also that can like bring a positively, like for example, like what Pak Saut points, that it is also can help to people try to responsible, and then feel that responsible with their own language. So about the future, I think when we talk about future, this is like should massive. So all we need to do it with the same thought, with like together. So from the government already make a regulation. It's like on Thursday we try to use Balinese languages, and not also about the languages, also the dress, our traditional clothes. So I think it's also help. And then if you go around Bali, there now the sign is with Balinese languages. So it's changed. Before only in Indonesian, but now it's with Balinese. But
you see that when you come into the airport.
Yeah, you come to the airport also. So it's not only Indonesian and English, but also Balinese. But that's not enough. Like we need to support also what the young people, young generation movement. It's like Balinese young generation make magazines about the Balinese works, like stories, poetry, and then so people can access it. So they make a ebook, so they spread that. So it's also like try to resolve the languages. And also there is one movement. It's like translate Western and then some famous authors like Franz Kafka and then Ernest Hemingway into like Balinese languages. And then the new things about the Little Prince, so it's changed into Balinese languages with Balinese words and some stuff. I think that's can help, and then yeah, if we do it together, I think we still can do it. But when in Bali there is like it decreased but not extinct yet, because the data said it's 70% people now talk about we talk with the Balinese language. It's different than, for example, when I was child. My first language is Balinese, so my mother and my father teach about Balinese language. But nowadays, especially in the modern places, in the city, so the parents teach their children start from Indonesian, so not with Balinese languages. So that's a kind of phenomenon that changes.
So are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Optimistic, I think.
Good.
Yeah.
You have to be optimistic.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
And finally, just a couple of minutes, Pak Saut, if you could ask Pak Saut just to give us a few closing words on how he sees the future and the moves that we can take to really prevent the extinction of more of the local languages. And then I'll open it up for a few questions.
Bagaimana di masa depannya melihat tentang bahasa
Oke.
dan apa yang paling penting untuk dikerjakan supaya bisa mempertahankan.
Baik. Tadi saya ambil kue serorot. Saya cari-cari, tas saya tidak kelihatan. Saya mau tunjukkan bagaimana kue serorot yang digulung putar-putar itu untuk menemukan rasanya.
So while waiting for the panel to start, I was at the green room, and they served us a traditional Javanese Balinese cake called the kue serorot, which is very exquisitely wrapped with a piece of long leaf, and it is shaped like a thin cone. And the part that you can eat is actually wrapped in a very intricate way, so you have to unspool it for a long time to get to the inside which you can eat.
Seperti itulah nanti kalau kita mencari kearifan lokal dari sebuah suku bangsa, kita harus putar cari kamus.
I see that as how we in the future will have to do in order to look for local wisdom from what we will have at that time. We will have to go a long way to get to the point of what we're looking.
Jadi apa yang harus kita lakukan untuk mempertahankan bahasa daerah ini? Saya optimis bahwa suatu ketika melankolia, kerinduan orang terhadap kearifan lokal akan muncul bersamaan dengan kerinduan terhadap bahasa lokal.
So what needs to be done then? I personally believe that the melancholy, the longing of people for their local wisdom will actually generate this interest, this love for the mother tongue.
Tetapi kita harus kerjasama.
But cooperation is important.
Kami harus menulis supaya bahasa daerah itu abadi.
We the writers need to write down these mother tongues so that these mother tongues can be perpetual.
Tetapi tidak ada gunanya kalau kalian tidak mau baca.
But it's worthless if there is no readers. There are no readers.
Ya, karena itu kita harus kerjasama. Tugas kami menulis, tugas kalian membaca.
So that's why cooperation again is important. Our part is to write and your part is to read them.
Dengan begitu bahasa daerah, bahasa lokal manapun di seluruh dunia, dia akan bertahan hidup.
And that's how I envision that all the local languages, the mother tongues all around the world will be maintained by exactly that way.
Saya lakukan dengan menulis buku.
I've done that by writing books.
Kemudian saya juga ketika anak saya menikah, saya buat kartu souvenir dalam bahasa daerah.
And when my children had a wedding, I provided them with souvenir cards written in the local language.
Saya menulis puisi dan tampil membacakan puisi di mana saya tidak perlu malu berbahasa daerah.
I read my poems and also other poems everywhere whenever I get the chance without feeling embarrassed about my local language.
Dan saya pakai ini di ciri khas daerah saya.
And I wear this, which is the tradition, characteristic of my tradition, of Batak tradition.
Dan ini membuat saya berbeda dengan penampilan tahun 2012 yang lalu.
And this look now is obviously very different from how I looked in 2012.
10 tahun membuat saya berubah.
10 years actually changed me.
Thank you.
Great. I think that's a nice note to finish on. So I think we have about 7 minutes. Can I open it up to just a few questions? The guy at the front. Is there a microphone? Here.
Hello, I'm Jonathan from Surabaya, and my question is, how about the preservation of the Creole languages? Because as a Chinese Surabayan, my first language is not only Indonesian, but also Japanese and English. I grew up with these 3 languages. And then, when you talk about identity, I feel like sometimes these words in Japanese is more make sense for me than these words in Indonesian or these words in English. So, and it's kind of complicated for me to, if I have to preserve a language for me, I have to preserve my mother tongue. That is Indonesian, English, and Japanese at the same time. That is like a Creole language, like a Singapore language. Thank you.
Who would like to address that one? Audrey?
So, in the novel, there's a character called James who is bilingual. He's an Irish speaker and an English speaker. And he feels incredibly burdened because he is the only young man left on the island. And he's looking after his mother, his grandmother, and his great-grandmother because his father, his uncle, and his grandfather were all killed in a single boating accident. They all drowned. So not only does he feel the burden of his looking after the women physically, but he's also burdened by the mother tongue because everybody says, you have to continue with it. And there's pressure from Jean-Pierre Masson, the linguist, that he should use his Irish name, which is Seamus, and not his English name. So it becomes actually a choice of the individual is whether you want to continue the language if you have children. So it is a burden and it is a responsibility, but it's one you take and you embrace as you go on, or you don't. And if you don't, well, who's to say somebody else should? So that's the problem we all as individuals face. It's a bit like your recycling. Are you going to do it? Are you going to change you're going to change the way you use public transport? It's kind of that fundamental stuff. It becomes about individual responsibility. So when you've grown up with 3 languages, that is one of the most precious gifts you've been given, because you understand you have 3 different insights into 3 different worlds. It's an incredible gift. But there's such a rush to kind of monocultural English, and so we each will make individual choices, and then how we respect the other languages. But is that
nice answer? One final question, I think, before they throw us out. The lady in the middle there. In a minute.
I just wanted to know a little bit more about what I think I heard was that on Thursdays, the Balinese community is encouraged, like there's a sort of a local movement to embrace traditional language and dress. Could I hear a little bit more about that?
Julie, a little bit about Kabaya Thursday.
So it's a regulation from the government that every Thursday, the like students and also the people who work in the office and stuff wearing the Balinese clothes, and then also they using Balinese language at that day, like more than the other day. So it's like a special Thursday or something like that. Yeah.
And is it working?
Yeah. So far it's working as I know. Yeah.
When was
But
this
it's not.
introduced?
But I think it's not. It's not only the government responsibility. It's also part of us. For example, you are a teacher, you engage the students to, like, for example, make a newsletter and then put the Balinese section in the newsletter. So, students from different from Java, for example, can learn bit by bit about the Balinese language, and then also put like small dictionaries. Like when you come to hotel, you will see like apa kabar, so what's in English. So maybe put something like that. Yeah, it's every Thursday. It's bit by bit. It's like a lot Thursday. So I think it will help like teachers, students, and also government, and also outside of the community at the school. I think it's can like the minimal thing we can do to like preserve the language. Thank you.
Yes, when was it introduced?
I think like 4 or 3 years from now. Yeah.
Okay. I believe, unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you to all of you, Audrey, Julie, Saut, Chris, for helping with the translation. There's so much we could say about this topic. I'm feeling we've just scratched the surface, but I hope that you've enjoyed listening to our three speakers talk about their languages and what they're doing to prevent further language deterioration and eventual extinction. I'm sure that our speakers would be happy to engage with you on a one-to-one basis outside the session, but in the meantime, thank you to all of you, thanks to our audience, and thanks to the Ubud Writers Festival. Thank you.